Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for our webinar with Showroom Logic, Ignore Your Gut. My name is Kara Newrider. I am the Digital Marketing Manager for Driving Sales, and our speaker today is Patrick Bennett. He is the founder of Showroom Logic. He has revolutionized the automotive digital marketing industry with his platforms AdLogic and ZipDriven. And in his dual role as founder and chief product officer, his love of marketing and technology have helped him create consumer-oriented solutions that solve real problems. So welcome, Patrick.
Hi, thank you. So I'm excited today to walk everyone through this webinar. We put together some really cool content to share with you guys, and we all know in auto that no one ever acts on their gut. I guess that's maybe a joke, but it really need to be more data driven. So you all know those guys in your dealership that suggest things because they just know. But the truth is there's plenty of data in auto, so there's no reason not to be using data. So in fact, many of dealers are already using data to their advantage, which I'll show later in the webinar. And my hope is that through this webinar, you'll be convinced that data-driven marketing is better than gut-driven marketing. So it's going to be very data heavy. Don't be scared by that. Embrace it. Hopefully we can have some fun, and definitely looking forward to your questions that we'll take at the end of the webinar. So I got to start out, my people make me put the slide in, but I said this was going to be a data-driven webinar, so I'm using data to show how awesome we are. We've won some awards over the last couple years, Customer Satisfaction Champion through Google. We're the Google Innovator Award, which is definitely my most proud award, being over product. We also have a top mobile solution, and we've been on the Inc. 500 list 3 years in a row. We just got our ranking for last year. So we're really excited about all the success we've had, and it's really due to our client partners and the trust they have in us. So let's dive in here. Quote you may have heard me say before, but analytics is pointless unless the data you're looking at is actionable. So as usual, my promise I make today is that the data we're looking at, we're gonna get into action, and we're gonna talk about how data can lead to action and some of the strategies other data-driven marketers are using today that's starting to make headway for them. So one thing I love about the auto industry is the wealth of data. And there's so much data that we're all sitting on. And really, I hope that you save time for everyone in your org and not go down these inactionable rabbit holes that really don't lead to any changes. My hope is that you focus on data that can drive strategy and make things happen for you. And that's really what this year is all about. I've been beating this drum all year, but I'm going to say it again. This is the year of data. So even us as a company, we have a brand promise now that we have to give our dealers a data-driven recommendation every month, or they get a credit. So we're really embracing this as well. Data has to be the driver of your decision making in marketing. So really, anytime you see data, ask yourself, can I act on this? And if you can't, dig deeper, because people really listen when you have data to back it up. I've found that time and time again as I meet with some of the top dealer groups in the country. When I come into a meeting with data, everyone listens. When I speak anecdotally, yeah, it doesn't go as well. So we know that data can help inform better decisions, and I said it was the year of data, and having the right data is really important to give you this insight. So for one, the right data can help you understand where sales are happening. So not just how well or how many sales you've had and where, but also dealerships around you, other models, other competing segments. You can also see where your competition is selling and where the purchasers live. The sales and registration data that I'll be referencing a lot today allows you to see the zip code in which the person who bought the car actually lives. So great way to see around you the landscape and where those purchasers are. It also helps you see these opportunities based on data and not gut. So again, if we're walking into a marketing meeting and saying, hey, these zip codes around us are ones we really need to focus on, people will listen to you if you have data. And that's really important. They also help you focus on models taking share in your market area. And I'm going to show you that later today, that really when you're looking at competing models in a segment, it's a zero-sum game. If you're down, that means another model is up. So really trying to understand the dynamic of your market and competing models is truly important as well. I'm going to be using term market today a lot. And there's really a lot of different markets, really, when we're thinking of what that term actually means. We have national. So, should you care about national data? Is any national data actually relevant to you? You have the state. As we zoom in a little deeper, we get to the DMA. And we also have the ASA or PMA or AOI or APR, depending on who your manufacturer is. But it's your OEM defined market area. And we also have an addressable market, which is going to be those other places maybe outside of your OEM market that you still sell in and are still crucial for you. So as we zoom in on this data, the point is to keep zooming until there is data to act on. If you can't act on it, we got to keep zooming and get deeper. So we're going to start with that. So we're going to look at some graphs today. This one is new car sales month over month variation. The fun thing I like about this graph is it's not really focused on just volume. It's actually looking at month over month increase or decrease, and it really helps you see where the market is going. So I was able to pull data from May of last year to May of this year, and what we've seen from analyzing a ton of data like this is markets actually line up pretty consistently. So anytime you see where sales were up nationally, this green line, you can see that in the DMA, the ASA, the state, those are also up. And obviously the swings are bigger in smaller markets, just because of looking at percentage increase or decrease. But you can see for the most part, they pretty much line up and they have a similar direction, except two different anomalies that we see. And it's really the anomalies that we want to learn from, right? Because if in July, new car sales dropped nationally, but inside your market they increased, that could be interesting. That could lead to something or some discovery. And the same here, where there was a slight increase nationally from July to August, yet in your market there's a big drop. So those anomalies can be helpful when looking at data nationally, but really this isn't super actionable. There's not much that we can really drive a strategy around because it's not specific to your market. So as we zoom in farther, the data becomes a little more, a lot more useful. So let's see if we can get better data by looking at a single OEM. So I'm going to talk about a Honda dealer today. And so we're looking at Honda sales. And we look at these different markets I talked about: national, a state, DMA, his OEM market, and then his actual dealer sales, because we want to see if his actual dealer sales, being a Honda dealer, line up with what's going on in these different regions. And you actually see again that, it actually is pretty similar. Now there are a couple spots, like this for example, where nationally it dropped, but even for this dealer and for his market, he was able to do better. In August, the opposite occurred, where the dealer was down a little bit more than what was going on nationally. So relative data specific to your OEM, it actually starts to mean more, because typically we can see these up-down swings, they match up regardless of the market we're looking at. But the swings are bigger as you go deeper, and that's actually what you want. You want these big swings to really understand what's going on, and you get those by going deeper into the data. So, can I act on this as a Honda dealer? Maybe. You could look at the times where you're different nationally and maybe see what you were doing at that time, to maybe compare. But I think it makes sense to go deeper. So let's look at a specific segment. So as a Honda dealer, I would sell CRVs, which would put me in a crossover segment. And if we look at crossover sales in these same buckets, nationally, state, DMA, OEM market, then we actually start to see a little different stories. So, why does looking at segment matter? Well, if vehicles in a specific segment are important to you, like say you need to sell more trucks and more SUVs, it'd really be helpful to know how you're doing comparatively to the market. Maybe you're really great at selling crossovers, but maybe there's more SUV market buyers in your market than crossover buyers. So I would want to understand what happened September of 2015, because the dealer swung down while everyone else swung up. So crossover in September was up in every single market except the dealer, his sales actually swung down. That is definitely something I'd want to hone in on and understand. Because was it his inventory? Did he change his marketing? There has to be a story there that the dealer can learn from. Now in July, what did the dealer do right? As some of the markets, you see this huge swing from the dealer sales compared to the rest of the markets. There was something that went right here. So if we're not really looking at data this way, if we're looking at the dealer line and we're missing out on these other lines, we would be missing that comparison data, which really misses a lot of helpful context, because this helps you determine where to look to try to understand, okay, what happened that month? What can I learn from? If we don't have that, we really have no idea where to look to learn. Now, we've been talking about volume and looking at volume swings, but what if we were actually looking at market share instead of sales volume? So if we focus more specifically on understanding share, one reason I like that is it actually automatically excludes seasonality, because your focus is more on whether your strength is increasing or decreasing in your market. Dealers have very little impact on the total number of buyers at any time in a given market. I'll show you a graph that shows that. But what a dealer can influence is how many of those active shoppers you are touching and influencing. So that's actually why I like to focus on share. So let's take a look at this example. If we're just looking at sales volume, it can give the wrong signals, right? Because this is my sales volume as a dealer, and we see months like this drop here, we see a drop here, we see a boost here. Well, what if the market's moving better in those directions too? Maybe I look like I have a huge month in September, but maybe everybody had a huge month in September. Maybe that was just a lot of car buyers. Or when I had this drop, I could say, dang, I dropped by 38 units. But you know what? I might still have higher share than the month before. So we're really missing out on context. And if you act on data like this, you actually could be in big trouble because the context is missing. And what happens is you can line up the usual suspects. One of my favorite movies of all time. But I hear a lot of dealers doing this. I was down 38 units this month. It's got to be because I recently changed my one of my marketing vendors, or I dropped or changed my radio budget. We didn't do that direct mail piece. It's really more my lead quality. It's because my salespeople can't close. It could actually be none of these, yet we're trying to find a story without having the right data. So let's add share to the mix. Market share gives much needed context. So what I did on this graph is I added a line to show all other dealer sales. So the combination of these two lines would actually be all Honda sales in the market. And as a market share graph, you want a bigger gap, right? So this gap here is huge because this shows you have a lot of market share when the gap is big because you sold way more than the market sold. When you see something that happens like this, that's where you're in trouble. Something happened bad that month because your market share was much less. And you can see those numbers here. So while my market share was 60% here, you could see because that big gap, my market share was only 50% here. So having this other line and being able to see those gaps means a lot more. Now the other important thing to look at is these trend lines, which I added too. So red is a trend line for sales volume as a dealer, and then gray is the trend line for the market. And what we can see is that the gap between here and here is much bigger. So what does that mean? That means as a dealer, I've grown my market share over the course of the year. So even though I have these peaks and valleys, if we look at it from a trend line perspective, my market share has increased from May of 15 to May of 16. Now that's great news, right? And so we can't just look at these different times and think, oh, all hope is lost. No, are we increasing steadily, surely over the course of the year? The other one I want to point out is this drop I was illustrating before. You actually see here from a market share standpoint, even though he dropped, he was still 63% market share, which is actually his second best year or second best month for market share. So I might have dropped by 38 units, but instead of throwing my hands up in the air saying, dang it, we did something wrong, we actually look and see that the rest of the market dropped in sales. and we still had the same share as the month previous. So to me, that's a win, right? Because the number of buyers, the total number of buyers decreased, but my share of those buyers actually stayed really strong compared to other months. Now this month, where I dropped to 50%, this is absolutely where I'd want to dive in and say, okay, what happened in November? Now, one thing that's really tricky to do is to go back, 6, 7 months and try to figure out what was going on. That's why we really encourage you to look at this data month over month. At the end of a month, when you can have access to this data, look back, see where you ended up, then make decisions from there. And that gives you a little less time to lose your memory, to forget what you guys might be doing, even just turnover in your dealership, other things that can make it difficult to try to figure out what was going on there. So this is really why I like market share. There's a few other reasons. It really shows market dominance irrespective of volume. So if you're really measuring more your position in the market, it really is a consistent way to measure models against each other. You can't say, okay, I sold 200 F-150s and I sold 100 Malibus, Focuses, and so F-150 I'm much stronger at. It's really, you need to look at market share for each model. You could be at 5% market share for F-150 and 30% market share for Focus, and that means you're doing better on the Focus. So really is a great way to stack up your performance against other models. Also a good way to pinpoint opportunities. Just like we were showing on that graph, when you see these times where you've dropped in share, that's really the best indicator that something has changed in your market. Either someone else is out there doing better than you, maybe being louder in their marketing, maybe there's different promotions that are going on that are influencing shoppers to choose them over you, or maybe you've done things for the better and you had a killer month because you just lined up everything properly. Now I mentioned that markets don't really grow every month, and this really shows that. Okay, because I think sometimes we think just because last month there were 100 sales, this month I should do 105, the next month I should do 110, next month 120, and so forth. Well, that would be great if that's really how markets work, but that's really not how, from what the data says. So when we're actually looking at all sales, this is any segment sale inside the dealership's market area, we actually can see these swings happening from a volume perspective, but they line up pretty well. And when we actually look at the trend line for one of the segments, like CRV, you see it only increased in the course of a year. Now that's not something to be real excited about, but that's really just how these markets work. The number of people entering to buy a car each month isn't something you can control. That comes from them getting off their leases, them, their car breaks down, they need to buy a new car. That comes them watching commercials or being influenced from national campaigns and deciding it's time to buy a car. So let's not fool ourselves that we can, increase that number. But when those shoppers are there, when they're in the market, how many of them we touch and influence, that's absolutely where a dealer can make a difference. And that's why we focus so heavily on market share. So now, talking about market share, let's look at some of these graphs when we're looking in the context of market share. So this is nationally now, and we're going to be looking for the next few slides at the top 10 models within the crossover segment. Again, focusing in on as if I were a Honda dealer, I sell CRVs, I really want to understand how I'm doing comparatively to other models, and again, can I act on this data? So here we're looking at the top 10 models nationally, kind of boring. It looks like maybe CRV is decreasing slightly in market share over the year, but there's really not much I can do on this. This data really isn't helpful to me because something could be going on very different in my market. So let's jump into California. We zoomed in a bit. State level gets a little more exciting, and hey, there are a couple things I'd want to look at and understand. For one, in October, we see Rogue sales spiked up really, really big. What is going on? Why in California was there a big spike of Rogue sales? Is that something, and obviously that pushed me down, right? Because if Rogue is up, then CRVs and other models are going to be down. Also look at this trend line of RAV4 slowly creeping up. So we see in the state of California, RAV4 is absolutely over the last 6 months increasing its share, and you see the CRV line going down. So we actually can definitely start seeing a problem there. So it's still not quite enough, in California, because the market could be very different, and we actually see that as we zoom in a little farther to the DMA. So this is still a larger area than the dealer's assigned market area, but it's really starting to look a little more fun because it's showing better swings, and it's showing how models really grow or decrease in market share every single month. You're not just going to see these straight lines. It really does fluctuate quite a bit. Now, that big swing we saw on Rogue on the state of California, you don't see it here. So that's why it's so interesting, again, if we're only looking at state level data and thinking, oh man, Rogue killed it in October, that must have been inside of other DMAs, because that was not the case in the DMA this dealer's in. Now, however, we do see that the RAV4 is looking strong, and you actually see it surpassed CRV sales in share over the last few months. So, this does start to mean something more. The red dots, these point out times where the CRV was up or down in market share, but it still might not be enough to start forming a strategy on, to actually, pull into a meeting with decision makers at your dealership and saying, hey, we're going to go after these certain models or do something because of this data. I would want you to get even deeper. This is the level I want you to be looking at. This is model share of sales inside the actual OEM market area or the ASA. It really looks like art. I mean, kind of a jumbled mess, but it's actually extremely insightful. For one, I can see that in my OEM market, I'm actually increasing my market share for crossover sales. So something is working. So when we actually look at the crossover trend for me, this black line, you can actually see that over time, I've increased my share of CRV within the crossover segment, which is great. That's exactly what I want to, next time my OEM walks in the door, that's what I'm going to be talking about is, hey, I'm growing my share. I'm doing something right. So if you remember in the national graph I showed you, the CRV was actually trending down in share. So as a dealer, I'm actually going against what's happening nationally, which is great to understand. So October 15th is very interesting. The CX5, this gray line, actually ballooned in share, going about above 15%, down from about 12%. So a huge jump in share for the CX5, which obviously pushed down CRV sales, right? Because this is the segment of crossover. So if CX5 is up and Escape is up, then that means I'm going to be down, and so is RAV4 in this case. So this is a perfect example of what did Mazda do, or what did my local Mazda dealer guys do that gave them such a big spike in October. And again, I wish we were looking at this data in November so we could go back. We'd be able to better tell what's going on and maybe what some of those influencers were. Also, more recently in April, if we look here, see another time where RAV4 jumped up and so did Escape, causing me to sell less than normal. And this is where, looking at competing models in the same segment is so crucial, because to understand which ones are making a move in the market and ensure that you are moving upward over time. So a chart like this, data like this, you can take action on this. You can look at dealers of competing makes. You can look at what's, each month look back and see which dealers around you, what they might have been doing for these models. You can look at which vendors you were running in April compared to maybe March or otherwise to see where you might have lost share. This is actually where it does lead to action, but you need to be looking at it every month to keep perspective. And this also proves, when I look at data like this, what I really see is it's just a constant battle out there for share. Just because you have great share this month does not mean, like here, does not mean the following month or month after you're going to sustain your share. And that's why it's so crucial to be looking at this. And this is really what I think of when considering this model variation of share that we see within these markets. It truly is a battle. Dealers competing every day with the inventory they have, trying to take more ground against the enemy, thinking of the right tools, the right vendors, the right message, the right specials. It's amazing that you guys are able to do what you do, let's just add in a little data to make you a little smarter. So when we're talking about market share, there's actually a few different ways I would like to have you measure market share. One is by make, and this is pretty easy to think about. This is your pump in, pump out report that you can get. And it really helps you see where you stack up in your backyard and beyond for Honda sales. So how are you performing compared to other Honda dealers around you? What is your market share against other Honda dealers? Also by segment is crucial, because now we start stepping the bounds of OEM and caring more about a category. So if I'm a Honda dealer, I'm going to care a lot about minivan segment. I'm going to care about the crossover segment, the mid-level or the mid-size sedan segment. I want to know what my share is in the market for those segments, because again, it means if I'm increasing or decreasing, it's because other competing models are influencing that. So I really need to understand my position across make. I can't just think of, crossover sales specific to Honda. I have to understand the other models that are playing in my market. The other one is by model. So when we're looking at your individual models, you want to ensure you are growing your top models, right? You each have your 3 or 4 core models that you want to be selling a lot of. You want to make sure that for those you have the share you need to get the volume you need. If you see that, for example, in one of your models you have 20% share, another model you have 10% share, there's something wrong there. And you got to figure out a way to focus on helping your other models increase in share inside your market. And again, the reason I like share is because it helps you kind of weigh all your model performance equally against each other. The other one is by market. So understanding your sales in and out of your OEM defined area. I've been talking about the ASA for this Honda dealer, but it's also important to understand where you've been able to sell, right? Because this is not utopia. You're not only going to sell cars inside of your defined market area. You're going to sell cars outside of that area as well. And so you want to understand your position in that market and see if you're moving up or down in share in these other places you're selling vehicles. Now, we love to get to the zip code level, and that's the other place we think you should be measuring your share for segment, for model, for make at the zip code level. Because you'll actually see that there's top zip codes in your market where you have high share, and there's ones that you might have lower share. And so focusing on those zip codes where you have lower share than normal, that is what can help you start moving the needle on volume, because you can start capturing more share of the activity of those buyers inside those zip codes. So measuring share in these different ways can be extremely valuable and important based on whatever your goals or objectives are, whatever you're trying to accomplish in the dealership. You may want to look at the data in these different ways. Now, as you're measuring market share, it's super important to understand your market. And I want to point this out. This happens all the time, right? Because when I talk to a dealership and we're talking about a marketing strategy and I say, hey, how far around your dealership do you want to focus this digital campaign? They'll say 40 miles, 50 miles, 60 miles. We actually know that Ford just came out with their 35%, their co-op, their co-op program, where for paid search you have to have a certain amount of impression share in order to receive co-op. And what they say is, guess what? That market should be about 35 miles. I don't know where they came up with that number, and that they can make a general statement on every dealer that you need to be going out 35 miles. Perfect example, this dealership here, 50% of all their sales are actually within 9 miles of their dealership, and I highlighted those in red. So that's 50% of their sales volume is from 19 zip codes out of 159, right? So when we start to think that if I was going to go out 35 miles for this dealership, I'm going to start touching on zip codes where I may have sold one car over the course of 12 months. Does that really make sense for me to be spreading my budget there? When these guys up here have the opportunity to go to Ford dealerships that are closer to them, I'm going to have to work harder to pull them into me. And yeah, maybe I did it once or twice over the course of the year, but that doesn't mean I should put my marketing dollars up in this area because I sold one car there over the last 12 months. We need to ensure we're focused on the zip codes that actually make sense. And that's what we call the addressable market. And we have some tools that kind of make that easier to get, but really it's just looking at where your sales volume is coming from. And I guarantee you, if you were to pull the zip codes that make up 50% of your volume, it's going to be less than 20, 25. So for some dealerships I've seen, it's like five zip codes is most of their volume. And again, don't just think, oh yeah, my market's 30, 40, 50 miles out. That's absolutely not the case. Let's look at the data. Let's let that define your market, let you own that, kill it in that before you start spreading your budget too thin. That's exactly kind of seen here as well. Here's another example of a dealer where in their market area, it's about 12 zip codes the OEM gave them. That's about 70% of their volume, so definitely pretty high. But still, there's 30% of volume that's about 20 miles out. So again, we need to understand what this guy, how he's been able to penetrate these zip codes and focus in on the ones where maybe he hasn't had as good of penetration, but definitely should be able to pull buyers from. So we gotta make sure that we define the markets properly, again, based on data. All right, let's talk about data-driven marketing results. These are real dealers that we've worked with that apply some of these strategies, and I'm going to show actual data of what happened and why this really works. Let's start with a Chevy dealer in Atlanta. The problem is, like most dealers, they have a finite budget, right? And they needed to put a bigger focus on models that were driving higher profit margins, and also models that they actually had inventory to support. So, you know, a Chevy dealer, you could think, oh, a Suburban, right, has a high profit margin. However, they didn't have a lot of Suburbans in stock, so it really didn't make sense for them to focus a big marketing strategy on a vehicle they didn't have a lot of. So we helped them determine Silverado, Tahoe, Equinox. What we proposed is target the top zip codes in 0 to 10 miles around the dealership for each one of those models and target outline addressable markets that were ripe for conquesting. So these were places maybe a little farther out that would that could support more volume and allow them to target. So to implement that, we created paid search campaigns, targeted zip codes, separated models, separated budget, and created a strong message. At the time, I think there was a Silverado rebate from the manufacturer, so he was able to get pretty aggressive on his MSRP, on his price off MSRP, and the results were awesome. I mean, when we looked at year-over-year increase in sales volume, it was 50 to 100% for some of these models, and a year-over-year increase in market rank. So, for example, he was ranked number 3 for Tahoes in his backyard. He now became ranked number 1. He was ranked number 2 for Silverados, now became number 1. So this really worked for him. And when we actually look at some of the results of where we obtain clicks, this is one example where we are targeting Tahoe buyers who are 10 to 20 miles away, because that's where the majority of the volume inside his market was. And as we focus on that, you see that's actually where the clicks were driving. So we're able to show that these areas, these zip codes we focused on, that's where the traffic came from, as you can see by this highlighted map of where the majority of the clicks came from. That's how we drove more traffic specific to his vehicle, specific to Tahoe, and actually helped him increase that volume. Let's look at another dealer, a Ford dealer in Texas. Okay, they had low share for specific target models, F-150, 250. You know, those trucks in Texas are very important. Also, Focus and Fusion had low share. So you said, you know what, let's create some AdWords campaigns for each of those models. Let's target the top zip codes, and let's separate budgets. That's very, very important. We wanted to ensure that the F-150 budget would not impede on the Focus or Fusion budget. So each of these cars got their own budget to ensure that we could drive enough results for each one. So we targeted the top zip codes, looked at 0 to 10 and also 10 to 20 miles around the dealership, finding the biggest opportunities where he was losing share in those zip codes for those models. We isolated the budget and messaging for each campaign, and what did we see? We saw growth in share for those target models in 2 different defined markets. Here's the data. Here's what happened. So when we look at 0 to 10 miles before for Focus F-150, 250 Fusion, so this was his sales the year before, and then the year after we see that not only did he increase in volume but also increased in market share. Now I'm transparent with you guys. In this case for Focus, he didn't increase his share, and that's something, you know what, we want to help him do, and so we're going to go back and focus and see what we can do to help drive more focus sales, because it was definitely working for these other models. When we look at 10 to 20, before and after, so these are top zip codes in 10 to 20 miles away from his dealership, again, and able to increase volume from the previous year, but also increase his market share for those vehicles. The only thing we changed in marketing for this dealer was turning on more specific digital campaigns. That's the only thing the dealer changed. And this is the, the results we're able to drive. Same thing, Honda dealer in North Carolina. So I'm sure none of you guys have ever had this problem where you have a lot of a certain vehicle in stock, you need to reduce the inventory. This dealer had over 100 CRVs in inventory, needed to reduce stock. What did we do? We proposed to target the top markets with compelling messaging to attract more buyers. So we targeted top zip codes, we created a lease payment that a dealer was comfortable with to attract more buyers, and he sold 45 CRVs the following month, which was his best ever. Usually he sold about 25 to 30, and he reached 80% impression share in those key zip codes. So this is a great example of, hey, we just focused on a single model. You don't have to do this for every model every month. I think that'd actually be a mistake because you're shifting your focus. But in this case, where we saw a single problem, we're able to isolate that issue, actually put a strategy behind it, and able to drive these kind of results. So I talked about aligning messaging. We ensured that any message that we were showing in his digital campaigns had this lease offer. And then the landing pages that we brought on also had that same offer. So you see the 208 month lease starting at, that's the same one we see here, and so forth. So we were able to drive more visitors with payments, with that type of messaging, and bring them in, and also target those guys where, those zip codes where the dealer needed to increase his market share. Let's look at another example. This is a Nissan dealer in Illinois who had a problem of lacking Sentra sales. So Sentra, we found it was a high volume market for Sentra, yet the dealership was not stacking up like he should. Even though a lot of Sentra sales were happening, this was not a vehicle he was doing a good job on selling. So what did we propose? We launched Sentra campaigns targeting top zip codes in 0 to 20 miles around. We found about 20 miles was a sweet spot of where these Sentra buyers were that he was not touching today. We created a campaign specific for Sentra, isolated a budget just for Sentra, and when we look year over year, 16.1% market share to 19.28, and 13.8 to 18.4. So you actually see that we're looking at 2 different months year over year. We actually kept it steady of him obtaining more market share than the year before. Again, solely by focusing in on a specific model and creating a campaign around it based on data. So for any of these campaigns, and any campaign you're going to run, you need 3 things. You got to have the right targeting, which I've been talking a lot about targeting today, and looking at market share and finding zip code. You need to have the right messaging, right? If you're going to enter the conversation, if you're going to get in front of these buyers, what are you going to say that's going to be meaningful, that's going to be different than other dealerships? And you also need the right budget. If you aren't willing to pay to play, you can pack your bags and head home, because there's other dealers that are going to be doing this, and they're the ones that are going to be seeing the results. So for all of those examples I shared, that's exactly what we did. We helped identify the targeting, we helped the dealer create messaging, we put the right budget behind it, and then you saw the results that came from it. Today, if we're not doing marketing with data, but doing it more with our gut, it's going to look something like this, right? We're pulling out the toy bow and arrow, taking some shots, letting arrows fly, might hit a couple bullseyes, but look how many times and shots it takes in order to get a couple wins. We would really like for dealers to be using data to arm themselves with a more precise tool that can really get them better execution and precision on their marketing. And that's what happens when data is used to enter the conversation. So one thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump out of my presentation and actually jump into a tool to show you how quickly some of this data can surface. And again, pull out insight and show you how easy you can pull out insight if you have the right data to look at. So one thing I want to mention, anyone on the webinar today, you can definitely get a free report which will show your market share at zipdriven.com. I know Kara's going to send out a link at the end too for you guys. But we want to help you guys see the right data, see data in your market right now that you can start acting on. So I'm going to jump into my browser now and actually look at a dealership and again show you that when this data is really brought together, you can surface this data really easily. So we're looking at this dealer in a few different markets, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and so forth. But what we're looking at is the different vehicles he has in stock. And I talked about one way to look at share is by model. So we can see, for example, within 0 to 10, this dealership for his F-150, he's at 22% market share, for Explorer 29, and so forth. So, you can see that certain vehicles, he definitely has higher share than others. And you can see that, he's doing really great on Fiesta Expedition, but really for F-150, does not have as high of a share that he probably could have when we look at, shares for other models. So again, this is a great way to kind of score models against each other by looking at their relative share. I also talked the importance of looking at sales by segment, right? Because if I'm selling a lot of F-150s or pickups, I want to make sure that I'm doing well in that segment against other competing brands. So again, if I look at my market share right now, I'm doing the best for small economy cars, on large SUVs, on lower range SUVs, but pickup, 22% market share, that's not that great. So when we actually look and break that down, you can see when we're looking at F-150, F-250, F-350, definitely not doing as good as I should compared to some of my other models. I also talked about the importance of looking at share at the zip code level. So when we actually look at share by zip code, we can see again these zip codes that are not that far away from me. So I can actually look and say, okay, this zip code is 2 miles away from me, and I have 10% market share. So how come these other zip codes closer to me have a higher market share? What is going on in this market that I only have 10% market share? There were 19 sales over the last few months. I had 2 of those. So this is absolutely a zip code I should be focused more heavily on and try to reach more people there, because the volume is there. People are buying the vehicles I have. I need to simply get in front of them better, and I can do that with digital marketing. So the other one to look at, I mentioned, is competing models and makes. And what we can see with this one is when we look at just what's going on in my backyard for the Steelers 0 to 10 miles, can see, for example, that Mitsubishi is doing extremely well, actually 330% better than what it was expected to do. So again, Mitsubishi has a couple models that are competitors for me at a Ford store, like the Outlander, right? So I need to understand, what is this Mitsubishi dealer doing? It's obviously affecting my sales on those, and he's doing way better than expected. So again, this can help hone in on those different opportunities. So when we have the right data, we can look at this even down at the model level. It really is something we can actually start acting upon. And as I mentioned, for us at our company, we use this data to give a data-driven recommendation every single month. And if we don't, we actually take a hit for it, because we feel that data is so crucial and so important. So guys, to really wrap up today, based on what I've shared, and I hope that the biggest takeaways are, the data is out there that can lead to decision making. The dealers that are doing it today are seeing better success than those that are just simply going off of their gut. The way you can get buy-in in your dealership is pulling data that's relative to your market and actually helps drive strategy. And if you do that, guys, I know you're going to continue to just own your market in a better way and a much more data-driven way, as we've seen with some of the examples I shared today and many other clients that we work with. So Kara, I want to turn it back over to you. Use the rest of the time to answer questions that may have come in.
Sure, thanks, Patrick. I'm going to send this link out right now for the free report that Patrick mentioned, so be sure to check your chat window for that. And you can also submit your questions right now, and we'll answer as many as we have time for. Real quick, if you guys are interested in hearing Patrick speak some more, he will be at Driving Sales Executive Summit in October. So be sure to check out dses.com for more information on that. And right now, let's get some questions started. So this question is from Steve, and he wants to know, how do I get buy-in from management at the dealership to put together the types of strategies you are talking about?
Yeah, the perfect question. And a lot of times, depending on your position in the dealership, buy-in is super important. And do it the same way I do. It's all about pulling data and really having your decision making be around that data. So if you're sitting with your GM or other people and you say, guys, over the last few months we've lost in share for this model. I want to do a campaign specific to this model, and we need to have a good message, and we want to focus on these zip codes because that's where we've been losing share. They're going to listen to you, right? And so the more data you have, the more action you drive from that data. That's how you get buy-in today.
Okay, great. And we have a question from Antoine. He's curious if zip driven only works for USA dealerships.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the data I've been showing today is based on sales and registration data from DMVs. Canada and other kind of countries, from what we've found, don't have similar data. So today, a lot of the insights I was sharing about market share and looking at competitive data, that is for the US.
Okay. And Christine is asking where you're pulling the data from Polk and OEM.
Yeah, so the data I use today is all sales and registration data, which you can get from Polk, you can get it from Experian, you can get it from Dominion. There's definitely a few guys that have this data. We partnered with Experian for our tool, so inside ZipDriven, all the data we show is powered by Experian.
Okay, great. And let's get this question from Sarah. She's asking, out of the 5 different market share types you referenced, which do you find is the most effective?
Ooh, that's a tough one. They're really all great depending on what you're trying to accomplish. I would say my favorite and where I like to drive conversation with dealers is really the model share. And that the reason why is because every dealer has to move certain models, right? I mean that's how you get certain incentives or good inventory. I mean, there's always the 3 or 4 core models you have to be moving all the time. And by looking at the share of each one and then understanding the zip codes where you're winning and losing, to me, that's really where you can drive the majority of your volume, is going to be focusing on specific models. So I prefer the model share report kind of as number one, but absolutely the other ones are super important too, especially, for example, if you have 2 models that might fall into the same segment, like 2 different truck models you have that would fall into the pickup segment, then in that case, the segment could be extremely important to look at.
Okay, and following up with that, talking about make, segment, model, zip code, etc. Which one do you recommend to start with, and how to drill down from there?
Yeah, I'd probably start with make, because that really shows overall what is your strength in your market. So if you can see that as a Honda dealer, all your Honda sales, you have 50, 40, 30, 60% market share, that really tells you how strong you are, kind of rolled up in an aggregated view. And then to me, that's where you can say, okay, I'm overall in my market, I'm ranked 60%. But hey, there's a zip code 2 miles away from me that I'm ranked 20%. And that needs an answer. I mean, why you're ranked 60% market wide, but this one zip code you're only ranked 20%? There's something going on there, and that is a perfect place to start digging into.
Okay. And Anthony has a question. How do you ensure that the traffic that's coming in for the company isn't bot traffic? BOT.
Oh, that could be a whole nother webinar. I think it's just ensuring that with whatever provider you're using has transparency built in. And if you're able to ensure you can see your analytics reports, you can see the placements or the places that traffic was bought and brought in, then you should be able to look at it and have a pretty good view of whether it's bot traffic or not. What I find is a lot of the bot traffic issues are behind vendors that aren't transparent. and they tell you, where you got some of your clicks, but they won't tell you where you got all of them. And to me, that's really an issue. Transparency is huge, and it's one of our core values.
Okay, great. And Amy is asking, what is a realistic conversion rate for those types of campaigns?
Oh man, another good question. Yeah. So I would say that when you isolate a specific model, you put a good message behind it, you should see a conversion rate increase from just your kind of normal stuff. And I know it's not a specific answer. I will give you a couple guidelines. So depending on the OEM and depending on the dealer, we'll see conversion rates for those campaigns around 0.5 on the more very low end to about 3% on the high end if you're including form leads and phone calls. I'll definitely say there's some anomalies out there. We have dealers that set up a great landing page, a great offer, very competitive. They're targeting the right zip codes. They can see conversion rates much higher, 7, 8, 9%. But what I would expect in a way, again, to measure for you is look at your baseline conversion rate for all your traffic. And then when you break out these campaigns, ensure that you're within at least 25% of that. So if you're a little under your baseline conversion rate, don't worry, because a lot of your baseline conversion rate is going to include your brand traffic, your OEM traffic. And when you're going model specific, you are going to possibly see a slightly smaller conversion rate. But as long as you're within about 25% of your baseline, I would definitely call it a win. But again, just tie it back to your cost per lead. If it's a cost per lead of $1,000, you can't make money off of that. But if you're driving leads at 30, 40, 50, even $80, and you can close those, then that's definitely something working.
Okay, great. Thanks, Patrick. I think we're ready to wrap up today's presentation. I want to thank everybody for attending today and taking time out of your day. I know we're all busy. And we will be sure that the recording and any follow-up materials are sent out. So thank you again, and we hope to see you again on another one of our webinars. Have a great day.